I'd like you to address the question from a historical standpoint. In other words, with FDR and the New Deal, what effect did that stimulus have on the country, and what lessons can we learn from that today?
Donna, that was for you, if you got that one.
I heard. It's a great question and a great softball for us, because the destimulative effects of all of the federal government spending at that point and every point in the U.S. history where we're able to track data have proven that those higher levels of government spending have actually destimulated the economy and prolonged the recessions, in many cases, depression in that case, arguably even created a depression out of a financial crisis back in the 30s. And, we didn't climb, the country didn't climb out of that until the 1950s. Arguably there was a war in there, but, that only makes the case that it might have lasted even longer. If the federal government hadn't been spending at those rates, had not created such a high government expenditure wedge, then we, as we are projecting today, would project that the private economy would have grown much more quickly. Well, as I said, lawmakers are facing very tough decisions with regard to the stimulus package, and unless the federal government changes its position and says that, Ohio taxpayers are going to be paying for this package regardless of what you use the funds for, then we recommend that they be used for, one-time infrastructure, short-term job-building investments, as opposed to permanently growing the size of your government in Ohio. If they do allow Ohio to use the funds that, again, Ohio taxpayers are paying for and are being sent back to the states in form of stimulus, if they were, for example, able to use those funds to begin to eliminate the income tax, as Buckeye has suggested, then not only will those 90,000 jobs not be permanently lost, but they wouldn't be lost at all. So that's a hopeful remark to end on, but even if those funds are not allowed to be used to reduce taxes, then we recommend very, very short-term investments in Ohio so that those 80,000, 90,000 jobs aren't permanently lost.
Donna, we have one more question that came up.
I do. My name's Stephen Moore. I live here in Lebanon.
Great name.
Thank you. My question is rooted around fundamentals. I don't consider myself a constitutionist in large part, but I do believe the Constitution has the guidelines all set up for this kind of thing. It seems to me that if we would have, both in the Ohio and federal Constitution, if legislation could use the constitutional component that would justify any authority of spending money in the first place, what kind of chance is that going to, would that be or has been discussed to require constitutional justification for purchases and expenditures?
Here, let me give it a shot. I would say at least in the state of Ohio we have advantages in that the taxpayer has standing to challenge spending that is not constitutionally supported by the state constitution. I think at the federal level there's been some writing recently about different constitutional strategies, but fundamentally the problem there is that the federal constitution doesn't grant taxpayer standing for spending that is not supported by the Constitution. So here at the state, we're taking a look at it in terms of finding the kinds of cases that will allow the judiciary to weigh in on the side of restricting spending, which is really through the means of restricting the Constitution. The history of the Ohio Constitution is, if you go back to 1851 and actually the period heading into it, it looks surprisingly a lot like today. It was a period of significant investment, but because the original 1803 Constitution had no constraints on the political forces, and when there was no constraints on political forces to spend and borrow, they spent and they borrowed. And many counties went into bankruptcy. The state may or may not have been in functional bankruptcy. It's kind of hard to tell from so many years past. But the people of Ohio voted in a constitution in 1851 that was a return to Republican grace. It included the balanced budget requirement. It completely curtailed borrowing, and the state, of course, grew and grew fantastically over the next century until many of those limits were stretched and probably even taken out in individual votes that happened since then. But the spirit that constitution was adopted was meant to be to put fiscal restraints on government that was investing in railroads. It was investing in the third frontier of the day, and government never does as good a job as the private sector does when it comes to investing. And because of that, it was really driving the state into bankruptcy and imposing very heavy tax burdens at the time on an agrarian, generally speaking, an agrarian economy. And out of that debate and the adoption of the 1851 Constitution, there are still remaining strong provisions for taxpayers to challenge spending that takes place that doesn't have constitutional authorization. I can't say as much on the federal level. We're really looking at it here at the state constitutional level. All right. Well, thank you all for coming today, and we appreciate your questions. And you can find the report on buckeyeinstitute.org. That's buckeyeinstitute.org. Thank you.